we're just doing deck building 101. I've decided, like, I really want to teach you guys the fundamentals so you can set out and build your own decks, right? I don't want to just be the net deck guy anymore. So let's do a little kind of deck building 101. We need to evaluate to ourselves, what does this deck need? Now, some of you guys were suggesting, when I was first building this deck, some of you guys were suggesting Rummage. And I said I don't like Rummage in this idea. I said specifically the words, I don't think Rummage does much for this idea. That probably seemed kind of weird to a lot of you guys, because this deck is just about drawing a lot of cards and being mana efficient, and you don't usually care about discarding. And Rummage does that perfectly. In reality, though, what the deck needs is the ability to survive the early game. Rummage can have a hard time doing that. A card like Mystic Shot or Thermo can help a bit, so don't get me wrong, I'm not saying like the PNZ direction is impossible, for sure, it's not impossible. But you need ways of fighting for the early game. You need to not die early. You need units, basically yes. And so I think one of the premium cards for this, because the thing is, like, cards from a deck building standpoint, I think a lot of people, the biggest trap I see in deck building is like the just like all-in synergy concept. But like, you'll build a deck like this and you'll start with what we call Control F deck building, right? So basically it's literally just putting all the draw cards in your deck. That's like the most like base level of deck building, where you just like, you're putting in, you know, you're putting in all the, just let me draw my cards, let me pay off. And it's actually, it's a very logical way to start a deck build, like even if you're a good deck builder. But for the most part, it's very important to like very quickly get out of that, because at a certain point you need to be asking yourself, okay, what does this deck need? And I think that's kind of the number one deck building tip, which is to approach deck building from the question of problem solving, right? You have to ask yourself the question first. What problem do I want to solve? What's this deck's weakness? What matchups are problems? And the problems exist in two ways, mostly two ways: matchups and hand states. Okay, so for example, you can solve hand states by you know, if you have a deck that is going to be like bricked out, sometimes you can shift your ratios around. That's a problem to solve, right? Or tutors sometimes. Matchups is kind of the problem we have here, which is, yeah, and if we want to get more deep into that, it's obviously getting killed early. It seems simple, it does, but it's actually really, really important, because a lot of people's approach to deck building is just like shoving cool shit and using, it's just, a lot of people play like a matching game. It's like, oh, this card says draw cards, and this card says draw cards, and then this card says draw cards, so I match those words and I put them in my deck. Or like, Misfortune says when I've seen you attack 4 times, and that's all the same words that Quinn says, so I'm gonna run these cards together in my deck, because they say the same words. It's Bejeweled deck building? Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that. It's fucking Bejeweled deck building. Yes, there's Control F deck building, and then there's Bejeweled deck building. So how do we help the aggro matchup? What kind of color do we want to be in for that? Well, I mean, Eye of the Dragon is one of the best cards for this. We're already running a lot of spells, and it's pretty easy to build this list into a situation where it's running more spells. So immediately, it looks like Eye of the Dragon is going to be what I want. What are other options? You guys are saying, I saw some of you guys saying Spirit's Refuge. So let's talk about that. Why do you guys think Spirit's Refuge would be good in this deck? Break that down. It gives lifesteal and protection all at once. Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad. It's going to be a little slow, actually. There's going to be a lot of situations where you're dead on like turn 5 and your slot bot doesn't even have stats yet. Let's talk about 2 problems with Spirit's Refuge. It doesn't really do best in the exact matchups that we want. Spirit's Refuge is not a card to shut down fast aggression. It's kind of a card to shut down medium speed aggression. Requires a board state? Yes, it requires a board state. Spirit's Refuge is a card that is better against like medium speed aggression than, because it's like, it costs 4 mana and you do need to ramp up your slot bot.
Please help, I'm hard stuck Iron 3. How do I play slot bot better?
Okay, we're helping that. We're helping that. Okay, the next question we have to ask, the next question we must ask ourselves is, okay, well, we're thinking about matchups from a problem-solving perspective. Let's think about hand states from a problem-solving perspective, okay? So what that means is, what's a hand state that this deck has a problem with? Well, not drawing slot bot is a really big problem. And Spirit's Refuge is a card that plays into that. Spirit's Refuge is a card that makes it even weaker for that hand state. Because if I'm not drawing slot bot, And you might say, well, Swim, you run a lot of draws. You'll probably have slot bot. And that's true. But if I'm drawing slot bot on 5, Spirit's Refuge isn't doing dick. Right? That's very, very important. Spirit's Refuge doesn't... It helps a bit in the matchups we want, but it's not the most direct thing to get the matchups we want. And it's hurting the hand states. It's hurting the hand states. Whereas something like Eye of the Dragon, as a comparison, and of course you could say you could run both of them, you could, but something like Eye of the Dragon will much more so like stabilize early positions. I can use it as a body. I can block like Fleet for the Tracker or something for free, and it's just going to be drawing a lot of spells. So now we have to ask ourselves, okay, so now that we're in Eye of the Dragon, does that change our build? You know, are we like, I just kicked Shadow Assassin. That was a quick way to change the build. What else? Well, we might want to get out of some like unit-based draw potentially. You know, do we want Yordle Grifter? We could be out of Yordle Grifter. I mean, we're using a lot of Bilgewater cards, but Yordle Grifter is actually fairly expensive, and you often don't need as many warning shots. Like, I could cut this down to a 2 of by like basically. Salvage could cut down. Usually we're kind of starved for mana. Deep Meditation is going to be much better than Salvage here. Sleight of Hand I could see basically being worse than Salvage in this kind of deck as well. It's pretty close between Sleight of Hand and Salvage. I think Sleight of Hand is probably the next thing to go. It's probably, you know, a little disappointing to hear because it's kind of a fun card. But we can take Slotbot concept and make it better, right? Sleight is a 0 of. Sleight is almost certainly a 0 of. At the end of the day, Salvage is actually helping level up your Twisted Fate and your Slotbot, and Sleight is... The slow speed does hurt it. The Plunder limitation does hurt it. Of course, you know, it's not terribly hard to use the Plunder, but it does hurt it a bit. And you usually don't want to be drawing things into your from your opponent's deck. So let's go ahead and take that out. So what's our problem with this deck now that we've made those changes? Well, hilariously enough, it's still the aggro matchup, because I mean this is going to be the problem for the entire deck build, right? So Eye of the Dragon, you know, we need helpers against the aggro matchup. Okay, Health Potion. So the problem with Health Potion is Health Potion isn't like Spirit's Refuge. Health Potion isn't really an anti-aggro card, really. Against aggro, you want bodies. Health Potion is best when you draw it late. When you kill a unit, you're stopping all the future damage that unit will ever deal, and that's always going to be much more than 3. What's like some kind of like proactive unit in the early game that could help? Claws of the Dragon is honestly not bad. The just like free bodies you get, free tempo you get when you're just like spamming spells is pretty nice. It sends you a little deeper into like spell synergy, and we do only have 15 spells, which is a little dicey, right? We can run some more of the Ionia package to get some of the spells. And here we have to ask ourselves, okay, are we in Retreat Return? Are we in Sonic Wave? What are we thinking? Well, Retreat Return is actually a good tool for Slotbot. If they go in to kill him on the turn you play him, which is going to be fairly often, if they have a way to kill this card, they will kill this card on turn 3. So Retreat Return is kind of nice on 3 if you're double floating. Like, I can't add too much more spell cast to this deck, honestly. This deck is just kind of like almost locked into running a certain amount of units. So I think Misfortune probably does have to go out in all likelihood. It feels really hard to not to keep Misfortune in this deck. She's contesting Slotbot on 3, and we don't really need Plunder enablers. So you might ask yourself, what should our other champion be? I don't know if this deck really needs another champion. I think it really might not. I could put in like 1 or 2 Lee Sins maybe if I start going more in that direction. I don't know if I really would want that, right? Fizz is not bad. Because we are casting a lot of spells, but he himself is not a spell, which will reduce our spell synergies, right? There's a very good consideration to just running no other champions. A very good consideration, right? But I could see like 1 Lee. Karma's a little too slow here. And Zed is offensive, not defensive. We don't want something like Zed. The perspective of this list does have to change a bit. I think that Retreat Recall and the spell synergy is probably the best way to take this. It's kind of like Deep Meditation and Eye of the Dragon. These 2 cards are very, very good and kind of can't be escaped. Like, actually, like they're just really, really nuts. And they'll help basically like keep games in your favor. Okay, well, we've got more Claws of the Dragon potentially. We've got Retreat Return, which is I think gonna be pretty good if we're going a bit deeper into spell synergy. Do we want to get out of Yordle Grifter? Well, it's helping the Plunder mechanic, but I actually don't think Plunder is gonna need necessarily that much help. I think there's probably better ways to use the Plunder mechanic. I think I might want to get a little deeper into Ionia cards. Not much deeper, but Yordle Grifter might actually end up being cut. This deck has a lot of expensive cards. It's a 4 mana card that draws you a card on top of that, so it's very expensive to fully play, right? And we do want like a higher degree of spell synergy. It kind of is spell synergy because it gives you a warning shot. The question is, how much does it limit our deck building, right? That's the question with it. Like, are we okay with being in 10 Ione cards? Are we okay running less than 3 Yordle Grifters? It's very interesting. We might actually run something like 1 or 2 Yordle Grifters. That could actually make sense. It's a little weird to run like a sort of like semi-in Allegiance card, but not impossible. There's Coral Creatures. If you're ever going to run Coral Creatures in a deck, this is the kind of deck you would run it in. I don't think this card is great. There are a lot of 1-cost spells that... So let's do like basic odds. So anything that says random, unless it says any region, it just means the regions you're in. So you Warned, Rush, Recall, Parlay, Jailbreak, Jettison, Health Potion, Ghost. That's 8. That's it. So it's going to roll between those 8 cards. Pretty much all those cards are bad. There's a couple that might be kind of good, but like if I draw Jettison, that's not going to be very useful. Like Ghost is going to be pretty useless. There's just too many cards, and Rush is just not really good for this kind of deck. It's not a card that's almost ever going to feel like it's doing much. By the way, there is Ye Be Warned. I could just run Ye Be Warned as well. It's not impossible. Yordle Grifter is going to do okay, but we're thinking we want more spells. We're thinking like Sonic Wave. We're thinking of upping the Claws of the Dragon potentially, because this is a deck that, because we're drawing so many, like mana is basically our biggest throttle here. So cards that are like free mana are really, really important. And Claws of the Dragon is free mana and a stabilizer. So it's basically everything this deck needs all at once. Everything this deck needs all at once, right? So that's pretty important. Dreadway Deckhand is actually possibly cuttable at this point. It's a really powerful stabilizer with Make It Rain, but oddly enough, it's actually kind of looking a bit cuttable, which is super, super weird to think about. And then there's like the Pilfered Good Black Market Merchant package. And unfortunately, the way for the deck to move forward is almost certainly to get out of Black Market Merchant and Pilfered Goods. I think that these cards force you into a bit of a limitation. The fact that you have to go out of your way to enable Plunder is a little awkward. Sometimes like you draw a buffed card, which feels really good, but we're not short on draws. Well, we are short on our spells, right? We are short on our spells. Spells and stabilizers. Those are the two things we want. Those are the two things we want. So Pilfered Goods and Black Market Merchant are going to go. We've got Claws of the Dragon. I actually can't say for sure it's a 3 of. It actually could be a 2 of, oddly enough, because that card does have very steep diminishing returns. A lot of you guys are saying this is at least in deck now. I don't know if it is. I don't think it's impossible for this deck to run like anywhere between 0 and 2 Lee Sins. I mean, I would kind of never run 3 of that card, I think. If you keep modifying this deck, you'll end up with Lee Twisted Fate with Slotbot. Well, right. And that is what we're doing. That's exactly right. Because that's the best Slotbot deck. Is like that deck is already fully built around Slotbot. Already fully built around it, right? It's doing everything that Slotbot wants to do, right? Deny. Deny, I don't think we're actually going to need here. I'm not sure about Key Guardian. Key Guardian is not a bad card, especially like when you do cheat it out on the Claws of the Dragon, but it's pretty alright. It's pretty alright. But yeah, I mean, we are making some very major changes here. It is becoming a, you could say, a different deck. It's still a deck that's built around Slotbot, as much as the deck can be built around Slotbot. The thing is, as much as like Slotbot seems like he wants you to draw, and as much as, yeah, I mean, to a degree you do want that, and this deck is already doing almost all the draws, in reality, Slotbot needs you to actually survive the early game. That is one of the demands of this card, right? That is part of what's built in here. And building around Slotbot involves keeping you alive in the early game, right? Pick a card, maybe a 2 of. Yeah, I could easily see that. I'm not sure how I feel about pick a card at the end of the day. It's a pretty good card. I actually that one's kind of a question mark for me. And Fizz might not be terrible in this deck either, by the way. Fizz is pretty underrated in general. So yeah, I mean, we can be at like 2 Key Guardians. I mean, I don't know if we wanted to be in like Sonic Wave. Sonic Wave is alright. It's a bit of a weird card. I feel like it's flexible enough, but to be honest, that one is a bit iffy. Like, I could definitely see getting out of that. You can run like maybe like one concussive palm as like a stabilizer or one Will of Ionia. You do want to play a deck that's like going very fast. And again, concussive palm and Will of Ionias are kind of like mid-game stabilizers, not early game stabilizers. Like early game stabilizers are just mostly units, like Claws and Eye, right? You just don't want to let their units gain control of the board, right? Double Trouble. Double Trouble is not the worst thing ever, but yeah, I don't really like it. So Ye Be Warned looks really good in this deck, and it's a card that we ran it as a 3 of in the Ezreal deck. The reason it can't really work here is because we don't have removal. You have to combine this card with like damage cards. It might seem like the Vulnerable combines with itself, but Vulnerable is very disruptible. If you go for a Ye Be Warned and then try to attack into it and the opponent stops it, you're basically trading down a game-losing amount of value. You just discarded a card from your hand without doing anything. That's really, really bad. So yeah, we're pretty close to the end of this build. I mean, Yordle Grifter can definitely basically get out of the deck at this point. So, I mean, we've got a few slots. I don't know if I would want to be like deeper into Geek Guardian. Are there any of the new Ione cards? Oh, there's nothing we would want to use anyway. But yeah, I mean, we've basically got like the early stabilizer units that we can. I'm just like re-skimming these. Fizz is a unit. He does things that units do, and he helps protect you from stuff like Make It Rain, which is really nice. I don't know. I think Fizz is a fairly solid card. I don't know if I would run it as a 3 of. Maybe like 2 Fizzes and 1 Lee Sin or something like that. Oops. I keep forgetting, like, because Mobalytics has the champions just as normal cards, so it's like Lee would be in the 6 area, but Lee is just at the top here. And then our last slot would just be some random flex. Call it Concussive Palm or Will of Ionia, or you could say Denied, depending on the meta. I think probably, like, out of those, I would favor Concussive Palm. And something like this is kind of like where I would be in Slotbot deck. 0 Shadow Assassin. Shadow Assassin is alright. It would be pretty good in this kind of deck. I mean, if you look to the Twisted Fate, like, okay, let's you know, an exercise here. Let's look at the Twisted Fate Twisted Sin deck, which this deck kind of turned into. How is this different? It's running Ye Be Warned, which is kind of like an experimental slot in. It's running a little bit less survivability. It's running like deeper, like mid-game tools. Well, I went down to 2 Lee Sin. Maybe this is a slightly outdated version. But this one is running Shadow Assassin. That's you'll notice that's kind of the one biggest difference here. And my ratios are kind of weird. But it's running Shadow Assassin. I could run Shadow Assassin. It's basically what Slotbot is replacing. And honestly, I can't confirm that Slotbot is wrong in this deck. I actually can't. I think this is totally fine.